Good morning, my beloved students. How are you today? Our lesson is related to a great scientific legend who's called Ada Lovelace. We will go deeper into the great contribution that she presented for humanity in general. Have you heard of Ada Lovelace yet? When one spent more than 15 years, as I have, thinking about Ada, probably most days and certainly every week. It's too easy to imagine that everybody else has heard of her too. But in fact, though Ada is better known to us today than in her own short lifetime, from 1815 to 1852, there are still many people who haven't heard of her. So, unfortunately, it's a great personality, but she didn't have much fame like other scientists. Indeed, I'm sure that most people haven't. Ada really is someone you ought to consider adding to your list of those people from the past who are worth knowing about. So, this is a recommendation for you to read deeply about her. There was a sense in which, on the outside, her life wasn't especially interesting, despite the unusual nature of her beginnings. So, it would seem for you from the very beginning that she's a traditional character. She was Lord Perrion's only legal daughter. She was born in a relative poverty at a time when Lord Perrion and his wife, Lady Perrion, formerly Annapila Milbank, were permanently in debt because a wedding payment promised to Perrion by Annapila's father didn't come about. So at this time, she was born into a poor family and she had a financial problem at the very beginning days of her life. After only about a year of living with Perrine, Lady Perrine couldn't stand his debts and betrayals and unpredictable, even often crazy behavior anymore. So his wife will leave him because she wasn't able to withstand the kind of life they were leading. She left him early one morning, taking with her the infant Ada, who had been born on December 10, 1815. Ada was only 1 month and 5 days old when Lady Perrine left her husband. Although there was some talk of the couples being reunited, like they gathered again, in fact, Perrine never saw Ada or his wife again. So these were just rumors. He died 8 years later, an outcast in Greece. He had been trying hard to gain support for a Greek attack on the Turks to win freedom for the Greeks. So he was like helping the Greeks against the Turkish people, and he wanted Greece to be free. Ada herself was brought up with a demanding education. So education at this time required a huge amount of money. It was supplied by her mother, who had become very rich when Ada was just a young child. So she was lucky enough for being with a rich mom. Ada grew up to marry a rather weak but handsome and kind man called Lord Lovelace. So Ada's husband was a very beautiful man, very kind, gentle man, but he did not have a strong personality. She is therefore known today as Ada Lovelace rather than Ada Perrine. So her name, she's named after her husband. The couple had three children, and Ada was a reasonably good and caring mother. In 1852, after several years of ill health and few years of the suffering for her life, of great pain, she died a terribly painful death of uterine cancer. So unfortunately, her body was cancerous and she had a great problem in her health. That's why she died in like horrific way. So this personality really suffered a lot from the her father from the being married to a weak personality and from cancer. She had led a fairly typical 19th century life of an upper class woman. So she at the beginning she was leading a bad life, but after that due to the financial resources that her mother had. She led a gorgeous kind of life. It was a life that ended too soon and that did not seem to contain very much in the way of success. Except that really is only a very shallow view of Ada. The truth of the matter is that she was a fascinating, imaginative, and intellectually unusual woman. So she was different woman. She was great woman. She had different capabilities. Her education was largely mathematical. Her mother was anxious that Ada wouldn't follow in what Lady Perrine thought of as Lord Perrine overly imaginative footsteps. Lady Perrine wanted the tutors she hired for Ada to use mathematics to limit Ada's imagination. So she wanted to control her imagination by using mathematics. But all this was useless. This was not successful at all. When Ada was only 12 or 13 years old, she made careful plans to build herself a large pair of wings to try to fly. So from the very, very young age, she was like a dreamer. She was a creative personality. It's perhaps just as well for future generations that Lady Perrine got to know of these plans. She stopped Ada from taking them any further. This was also fortunate for future generations because the lives of the 19th century pilots were often brought to a sudden stop by a nasty accident. So, the life of the pilot at this time was horrific. So, it was advisable for her to avoid this kind of harsh life. Okay, determined, Ada at the age of 17 became a good friend of an odd but absolutely brilliant English mathematician, an inventor named Charles Babbage. So Charles Babbage was a creative personality, but he was bizarre a little bit. He was different personality. He was 24 years older than she. They met at a party in London on June 5, 1833. It's known that what they talked about when they met, but what is clear is that Ada was fascinated from the start by Babbage's efforts to build a calculating machine from cogwheels, which he called the difference engine. So she loved the creative person like her. The following year, Babbage started work on an even more complicated type of cogwheel calculator. He named it the analytical engine. It made use of punched cards and many of the features of a modern computer. So but they together had great ideas at this early time of life. In fact, neither the difference engine nor the analytical engine was completed during Babbage's lifetime. However, there was a successful modern project to build a difference engine in 1991. So they took his ideas and the people started to develop them. It used only materials and only levels of accuracy that Babbage himself could have used. The 1991 difference engine worked perfectly. Today, there are two working models in the world supporting Babbage's dreams that his machine could be built. However, the analytical engine has not been built so far, and it may never be. Even so, Babbage's plans for it are detailed. They certainly show that he was trying to build a digital computer in the 1840s. Ada became deeply interested in Babbage's work. She translated from the original French a paper written about the analytical engine by an Italian scientist. In those days, French was the European language of science, no matter what the nationality of the writer. Perhaps the most interesting thing of all about Ada is this. She wrote a lengthy essay about Babbage's analytical engine, which she added to her translation. It is actually much longer than the translation itself. At around 20,000 words, it's basically a short book that's one of the most exciting documents of the limited prehistory of the computer. So he had like his own participation in the field of computer and computer science. What I found most interesting of all in my research on Ada is that it is beyond question today. Though for about 20 years male computer scientists refused to accept this, that Ada had an understanding about the analytical engine. that not even Babbage had. Ada saw that the machine was, in fact, an all-purpose machine, could be used to control all sorts of processes, including, most remarkably, music. In her paper, she includes a clear description of how the analytical engine would process music. This basically is exactly what the modern digital friends we carry in our pockets and our briefcases do for us whenever we want to listen to music. Babbage, though, never saw his analytical engine as anything more than a machine for doing math. Ada's vision, and it really was a vision, went far beyond what Babbage could see. Ada called her thinking about mathematical scientific subject poetical science. She seems to have meant science joined with the imagination. Of course, today computer manufacturers and smartphone manufacturers have to sell their products by the million in a highly competitive marketplace. They do use the imagination to show how their computers can be used and promote what they can do for their users. But Ada was breaking new ground in her own writing on the analytical engine. So the computer and the attachment of the computer right now have been long related to the great theories of Babbage and Ada. Ada also realized that Babbage, who could be irrecyclable, the first ever biography of him is called The Irrecyclable Genius, a grumpy and uncaring about the plans of others, was not, to put it mildly, a polite man. Ada offered to help him manage his effort to build an analytical engine, but sadly Babbage was too unaware, and very possibly on that occasion too proud, to realize what a great advantage her help could be to him. He quickly rejected her offer of help. All the same, their friendship was strong enough to survive this rejection. Also survive the disappointment that Ada felt at this time, and afterwards she was like not happy for his rejection. Ada didn't only have an amazing vision for the future of computing, she also wrote what in many ways can be seen as the world's first computer program. However, that depends on what you actually mean by a computer program. So the notion was radically different. That is basically Ada's algorithm, her set of instructions for solving a problem. So she has a different way for solving a problem and having a different idea for the computer program. A computer program she describes in her essay by which the analytical engine would have been able to carry out a particular mathematical function. Ada was indeed amazing, yet this upper-class Victorian housewife successful essay, known today as Ada's Notes, was almost completely forgotten from around the 1850s until the 1970s, with one notable exception. The British computer pioneer Alan Turing was aware of her work. So some people leading or pioneers in the field of computer, they did know about her personality and her creative ideas and her contribution to the field of computing. In the 1970s, when Babbage's work was rediscovered, a new spotlight was put on Ada's own work. Today, she's seen as one of the most insightful and visionary women in the history of science. What Ada referred to fondly as her poetical science, so she loved poetical science, made her one of the most far-sighted women, not only of the 19th century, but of all time. Okay, this is our lesson for today. It's about a great personality who had great contribution, Ada Lovelace, Science Legion, how she had a horrific life at the very beginning days, but how she developed her own capacities and her love for science and mathematics and started to move forward towards achieving great creations for the humanity and moving the world forward. This is our lesson for today. Thank you so much and have a nice morning.